An early test of Republican unity and President-elect Trump's influence over the party's slim majority in the U.S. House will play out this Friday on Capitol Hill. House Speaker Mike Johnson hopes to be reelected to one of the most powerful positions in Washington, but his fate is uncertain as just a few Republican defections could derail his bid. Joining us to discuss this and more, Brett Samuels, White House reporter here at the Hill. Hey, Brett, so Trump has endorsed Johnson. Musk has endorsed Johnson. The vast majority of House Republicans support him. But there has already been one Republican congressman saying that he will vote no. Others are uncommitted. Chip Roy today, one of the rebels, said, "I don't believe Johnson has the votes." Can Johnson survive?
He can. Will he is sort of up in the air. It seems like he might have a bit of a math problem, to your point there. He can only afford one defection. He needs 218 votes to secure the gavel. Republicans will have 219 lawmakers seated, so if Thomas Massie, as we mentioned, votes against him, he can't afford any other defections if everyone else votes for a candidate. So, whether he survives is still sort of up in the air. If he doesn't survive, it certainly won't be because President-elect Trump came out and, sought to undermine his bid or something. Trump and his allies have basically been pleading with Republicans to get behind Mike Johnson, to say that there are more important things to worry about, that we should rally behind Mike Johnson and get on with doing the business of Trump's agenda. So this will certainly be a test of whether House lawmakers fall in line and listen to Trump on this.
Some of his allies, because we've been talking a lot about this tech billionaires versus MAGA diehards fight that's been brewing inside the Republican Party. One of the people that has been saying some not so kind things about Johnson, Steve Bannon, one of those diehards. You have this article out that you're talking about how this is a big test for Trump in the beginning of his second term. If he can't bend the House to his will on this one, what does that say about spending, debt ceiling, tax cuts, all very difficult things he wants to get passed?
Would be very notable, especially because it would be sort of the second blow in as many weeks, basically, to Trump's sort of influence in the House. We saw before Christmas where he tried to get House lawmakers to include a debt ceiling increase or the elimination of the debt ceiling tucked into this government spending bill. That failed on the floor. Dozens of Republicans voted against it, sort of a sign that, Trump can't just snap his fingers and House Republicans will fall in line. So if this happens again, where he's urging them to vote for Mike Johnson, but he sees multiple defections where they don't back Mike Johnson, I think it's a sign that things could get very dicey for Trump's agenda, particularly in the House, where Republicans are only going to have a margin of just a couple seats, where they can't really afford more than a couple lawmakers defecting.
Speaking of Musk's influence, he's getting involved in German elections. These elections are set to be held next year in February. He's endorsed the far-right AfD party. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz responded saying it's the citizens of Germany who will decide what happens in their country, not the owners of social media. Directed, it appears there, at Mr. Musk himself. Now, the AfD does have a solid base inside Germany, but the rest of the party say they won't work with them because they are despised so much. I wonder if you think a Musk endorsement of AfD actually solidifies the opposition to the party within Germany.
Yeah, I think, to your point about the Chancellor's statement today, I think there is certainly some backlash that we might see to Elon Musk getting involved here. J.D. Vance, the incoming vice president, had also in recent weeks put out a couple social media posts voicing support for the AfD party, suggesting that German citizens should consider backing them. So I think there is certainly a good chance that German officials, certainly like Chancellor Scholz, and maybe some German citizens, would not take kindly to folks like Elon Musk, like J.D. Vance, trying to kind of weigh into their elections, nudge voters in a certain direction. And to your point, it may just kind of, solidify the AfD party as sort of the outcast party in the upcoming elections.
Back here in Washington, Mayor Muriel Bowser said she had a great meeting with President-elect Trump, went on to say that she's optimistic that they will continue to find common ground during his second term in office. I thought Trump was a fascist, according to Democrats. Now Bowser says he's a supporter of the District of Columbia. Funny, because earlier this year Trump said D.C. was a horrible killing field. Is this a just play nice strategy that we're seeing from some Democrats, mayors, governors?
Yeah, Muriel Bowser is maybe taking a page out of the Jeff Bezos playbook, the Mark Zuckerberg playbook that we've seen with some of these business leaders. We may be seeing the same thing from Democrats like Muriel Bowser, who are trying to strike this friendlier tone as Trump prepares to take office. The thinking being that if they can get on his good side, maybe they can influence his thinking on some of these issues and have a seat at the table rather than just, be his enemy right from the jump and, essentially be at odds with him butting heads the entire time. Muriel Bowser, as you mentioned, certainly she has clashed with Trump throughout the years. Trump has repeatedly sort of disparaged D.C., said the city is dirty, commented on the homeless population in D.C., said the buildings are ugly. Certainly striking a different tone. We'll see if it pays off. We'll see if there is any kind of collaboration between D.C. and the Trump administration moving forward.
Trump posted, "Everybody wants to be my friend," the other day on social media. Could be a result
Add her to the list.
of this strategy. Heading into 2025, there are some major questions about the future of Texas. There's this ongoing power struggle within the state between the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. Some big issues are coming to a head: immigration, water rights, power grid, marijuana policy. What are you watching for in the Lone Star State in 2025, and why do you think that's important for the nation as a whole?
Yeah, you mentioned a few of the key issues like abortion, like marijuana policy, immigration. Certainly Texas is worth watching just because it's one of the largest states in the country. Its population is booming. People certainly moving there. Some people moving away from Texas because of things like abortion policy, restrictive abortion policy. But one thing that I'll be watching is kind of how Texas moves forward in 2025 with Republican in the White House, with the Trump administration coming in. For the last 4 years, Texas has sort of positioned itself, and Governor Greg Abbott has sort of positioned himself as this sort of bulwark against the Biden administration. They've gone to court multiple times against the Biden administration, trying to put up barbed wire fencing at the border, trying to impose these immigration and these restrictive abortion policies. Now that a Republican is in the White House, how does that change sort of Texas's approach? Are they less combative? Do they sort of recede back out of the spotlight? I think that'll certainly be worth watching with a new president, new administration in the White House.
I want to ask you about Karoline Leavitt. She's 27 years old. She's going to be the youngest press secretary to ever hold the office when she takes over next month. There's been a lot of talk of allowing alternative media types more access to the White House. You're a White House reporter. What do you expect from her in this role?
Yeah, Karoline. So I knew Karoline when I covered the Trump administration in his first term. She worked in the press office then. Since then, she worked for Elise Stefanik, who of course now is Trump's nominee to be an ambassador to the United Nations. She ran for Congress unsuccessfully in New Hampshire. Would have been the youngest woman ever elected to Congress had she won that race. And now here she is as Trump's incoming press secretary. Certainly, it's arguably the most forward-facing role. She'll be the most prominent face of the administration, other than Trump himself. So it's certainly a big role. There has been talk of some changes, whether the Trump administration will kind of reward the kind of outsider media, whether it be podcast hosts or bloggers or conservative outlets who maybe played a bigger role in Trump's campaign, and sort of the folks that he talked to try and connect with the public, whether they'll get a more prominent seat at the table or in the briefing room. As far as I understand, that's sort of still being figured out, and whether those changes will take place. But certainly, will be a new era with Karoline Leavitt taking the podium over in the new Trump administration.
Certainly not one to shy away from verbal combat with the press. So it'll be interesting to watch you guys speak with her on a regular basis. That's all I got for you. Wanted to ask you about your New Year's Eve plans. Are you going to be taking the Hill's private jet to Times Square, or are you going to take the limo?
I will be trying to save the Hill some money and take the Amtrak up to Times Square.
Nice, yeah. I'm staying in D.C.
Yes, I will be staying in Virginia. But
okay.
But yes, hope you and all of our viewers have a good new year, and we'll see you all in 2025.
Same to you, man. Brett Samuels, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Drew.
As the world continues to mourn the death of former President Jimmy Carter, state funeral plans are underway, beginning Saturday, January 4th, and concluding Thursday, January 9th. The state funeral begins on Saturday with a motorcade traveling through Carter's hometown of Plains, Georgia, pausing in front of his family's farm, where the National Park Service will ring the historic farm bell 39 times. The motorcade will continue to Atlanta, where President Carter will lie in repose in the state capitol through Monday. On Tuesday, Carter's family will accompany his body to Washington, where he will lie in state through Wednesday. On Thursday morning, the Washington National Cathedral will host a national funeral service before Carter and his family return to Georgia for a private funeral service that afternoon. The late president and his family will then travel by motorcade to the Carter residence for a private interment that evening. The public is invited to line the motorcade through Plains to Carter's final resting place. President Biden has declared next Thursday a national day of mourning. As the new year comes to a close, so too does the current session of Congress. But looking back, many Americans are left asking, did they really do anything? NewsNation's Elina Shirazi crunched the numbers for the 118th Congress and has the report card.
The partisan gridlock from both parties in Congress certainly playing a factor here. As we know, this session of Congress goes down as one of the least productive in American history. We're looking at this Congress, the 118th session, compared to last year. We know this Congress passed just 209 bills over the last 2 years. We know that's down from more than 350 in the last Congress. But keep in mind that on average, each Congress over the last 32 years has passed more than 389 bills that were signed into law. A lot of the gridlock was fueled by partisan battles between the Republican-controlled House and Democratic Senate, as well as the White House, not to mention several funding fights as well. Efforts to expel New York Congressman and accused fraudster George Santos from office, 2 representatives being indicted, and of course, notable infighting amongst the GOP, leading to the historic removal of Speaker Kevin McCarthy and the days-long efforts to replace him. And now some Republican lawmakers warning House Speaker Mike Johnson and the rest of the GOP to work across the aisle and not hand control over to the party's right-wing base. Listen here.
I think we still got to govern from the center to the right and not just from the far right, because the fact is you're not going to get those votes in the House or Senate if you try to govern that way. I heard a couple times this week, we get 100%, the Democrats are going to get 0. It doesn't work that way. James Madison designed a system that forces a consensus building. And so you can't just govern from an extreme position.
And as Congress is gearing up for the new session in the new year, we know that Republicans will hold the trifecta, the White House as well as both chambers of Congress, the Senate as well as the House. But the question is, can the GOP form a unified front moving forward? In Washington, Elina Shirazi, NewsNation.
Thank you, Elina Shirazi. New concerns in Europe over the security of undersea infrastructure after Russia was allegedly linked to a sabotaged underwater power line between Finland and Estonia. The power cable was allegedly cut on Christmas Day by a ship registered in the Cook Islands. The ship is believed to be part of Russia's shadow fleet, working to skirt Western sanctions. It was seized by Finnish officials Thursday. China has also been accused of 3 incidents since 2023 that have disrupted power lines in European waters. Tensions have intensified between the West, Russia, and China over the war in Ukraine. The EU foreign policy head said in a recent interview that the sabotage attempts formed a deliberate pattern aimed at damaging Europe's digital and energy infrastructure. European officials are now calling for NATO to bolster undersea infrastructure protections. The FBI once again warning that professional crime organizations are burglarizing the homes of professional athletes. The latest victim, Dallas Mavericks guard Luka Doncic. His home in Texas was broken into on Friday. The Dallas Morning News reports about $30,000 in jewelry was stolen. According to a business manager for Doncic, no one was at the home at the time of the break-in, and an investigation is underway. It comes just weeks after Kansas City stars Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes both had their houses burglarized, as did Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow. Authorities say they suspect South American theft groups are behind the break-ins, believing they are targeted burglaries by organized crime and skilled groups that are highly trained. Law enforcement says the crooks have access to technology like Wi-Fi jammers and hidden cameras to better track when people are coming and going. The NFL and NBA have both issued security alerts to their players in the wake of the break-ins. As the world begins to welcome 2025, the New York Police Department is upping security as it braces for 1 million people to descend on Times Square for the Big Apple's New Year's Eve ball drop. NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch says there are no specific credible threats, but they have been operating in a heightened threat environment since October 7th of last year and remain vigilant. There will be uniformed and plainclothes officers on the ground, as well as K-9 teams, mounted police, helicopters, and drones in the sky and boats on the rivers. New York Governor Kathy Hochul says security staffing will be at the maximum and that the National Guard will be standing by just in case. There were some of the biggest issues in 2024, and immigration and border policy appear to top the list of priorities for the incoming Trump administration. Our colleagues at NewsNation have been on the ground on the border all year. Here's a look at what they uncovered.
The border crisis. Over the last 4 years, the U.S. has seen the largest immigration surge in history, averaging more than 2 million migrants a year from all around the world in search of the American dream. And 2024 was no different. The year began with more controversial moves by Texas Governor Greg Abbott to relieve some of the burden placed on cities in his state by transporting migrants to sanctuary cities like Washington, D.C., New York, Chicago, and Denver. Texas spending an estimated $200 million this year exporting migrants to cities with nowhere to go. And during it all, a shocking move by Congress, who voted to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas over his handling of the border crisis.
The greatest domestic threat to the national security and the safety of the American people is Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas.
The Senate later dismissing the impeachment, deeming it unconstitutional. Meanwhile, the Justice Department sued Texas, claiming the state's new immigration law violated the Constitution. Under the law, Texas police would have been allowed to arrest migrants suspected of illegally entering the U.S. A federal judge blocked that law. But the state would ultimately be the victor and start arresting on the state level for criminal trespass. This as the Biden administration was told it could take down razor wire installed by Texas that was meant to keep illegal immigrants out. And NewsNation was there to capture exclusive video of smugglers destroying barbed wire fencing to get illegal immigrants across the border. Drones, wire, walls, buoys, pepper balls. The fight to control illegal entry into the United States took on renewed urgency as migrants found new ways to access illegal entry into the country. And Mexican officials conducted operations on freight trains to stop thousands of migrants from riding train cars to the U.S. border. But the fight to control the border made harder by the cartel. Crime exploding as groups of masked gunmen kidnapped migrants, participated in human trafficking, transported guns and drugs across the border, including deadly fentanyl. The violence playing out in U.S. border towns before moving north. In New York, outside a migrant center in Times Square, shocking video of a brutal attack on New York police officers by a group of migrants, as a notorious Venezuelan gang called Tren de Aragua infiltrated America's cities and towns, even being given the green light to fire at officers in New York and Colorado. In Aurora, they took over an apartment building, toting guns and terrorizing residents and bringing with them a narcotics empire. This year also saw the horrific death of Georgia nursing student Laken Riley, the 22-year-old killed by an undocumented immigrant with ties to TDA, who entered the U.S. illegally 2 years ago, bringing even more attention to the debate over border laws. NewsNation was there as the Take Our Border Back convoy, also known as God's Army, made their way to the southern border. They started in Virginia with stops in Florida and Louisiana before arriving in Texas to raise awareness about the crisis on the border.
We're a nation of immigrants, but we have to have security at our border and know who's coming in.
And dueling trips to the southern border by President Biden and former President Trump, now President-elect Trump, emphasizing the importance of the border issue to the presidential election.
It is the number one issue.
And NewsNation getting an exclusive look into the dangers border agents face hunting down migrant smugglers. A chopper crash during a routine operation near the U.S.-Mexico border, leaving 3 guardsmen dead. Only 1 soldier survived. And a NewsNation exclusive uncovered the amazing story of a teen who barely escaped capture by the cartel. And a so-called migrant influencer on TikTok was arrested after going viral for helping migrants take advantage of American laws, protecting squatters. And a riot on the border. In El Paso, more than 400 migrants tore down razor fencing and rushed National Guard troops at the gate, injuring Texas National Guard members. Roughly 200 migrants were arrested. And we saw rampant smuggling on the border. A Texas Guard soldier accused of trying to smuggle 2 migrants into the U.S. in exchange for $5,000. And it was all caught on camera. And scenes like this man with a gun strapped to his body occurring. This just one of 10 separate seizures at Arizona's Port of Nogales. Cash, guns, including more than a dozen AK-style rifles, and drugs like fentanyl, meth, and 160 pounds of cocaine seized at the border. And a mistrial for Arizona rancher George Allen Kelly, accused of shooting an unarmed Mexican man on his property. And we brought you a border special with a trip back to several of the stories that captured the nation's attention, including the humanitarian crisis and the fight to keep the cartel with its drugs out of America.
We see all these pills that are being caught, but much more of this drug is getting by us.
Illegal drugs, the primary funding source of the cartel. But according to Congress, it's a $13 billion a year industry just smuggling humans. And those humans, some of them migrants, wearing color-coordinated bracelets to identify who paid the cartel $3,000 to $5,000 just to cross the border. And now with President-elect Trump set to take office in January, the rush to the southern border is picking up ahead of his massive deportation plan. Caravans of migrants headed for the border as undocumented immigrants make their way to sanctuary cities, even as some self-deport, and the nation's new border czar, Tom Homan, prepares for what's to come in the new year with a new administration. Allie Bradley, NewsNation.
And that's today's Daily Debrief, our last show of 2024. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.